Life is a gift for which we are grateful. When a life ends, we gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. Larry Lee Kehler has died. On this day, we gather to grieve, we gather to mourn, but more, we gather to remember. We gather to celebrate. And we gather to give thanks for the life of Larry and for all lives well lived. These words are from an anonymous poet. Let us be honest with death. Let us not pretend that it is less than it is. It is separation. It is sorrow. It is loss. But let us neither pretend that death is more than it is. It is not annihilation. As long as memory endures, their influence will be felt. It is not an end to love. Human need for love from each of us is boundless. It is not an end to joy and laughter. Nothing would less honor a good soul than to make our lives drab in counterfeit respect. So let us be honest with death, for in that honesty we will understand it better and ourselves more deeply. Larry Kehler was born on August 31st, 1937 in Warsaw, Indiana, the only child of parents Dale and Ruth Kehler. Larry graduated from Warsaw High School and then served in the Air Force for 4 years. He attended Indiana University, where as an undergrad he studied psychology, eventually then receiving a master's in management consulting. Larry was a musician. He played drums in the Air Force and then with a number of small bands. He enjoyed a long career as a management consultant, eventually becoming partner in charge at his company while living in Indiana, Missouri, and Mexico City, Mexico. Larry was devoted to his first wife, Karen, and their two daughters, Heidi and Gretchen. When Karen became ill, Larry cared for her. After Karen's death, Larry became the single parent of his two young daughters. Apparently a challenge he was up to. Mostly. Heidi and Gretchen will have more to say about that in a few minutes. In 1985, Larry married Ann, I'll say your name, Michaud, which added to his parenting duties the role of stepdad to Ann's two kids, Stephen and Julia. I think we'll hear from Julia in a few minutes, and from Ann. One thing I think stood out about Larry is that he was such a natural mechanic. He could fix anything. If he couldn't find a part to buy out there anywhere, he would just make one from the stuff he had lying around. Cars, boats, planes, RVs, all things he enjoyed owning, all things he enjoyed working on, all things he enjoyed keeping, sometimes, as I understand it, beyond their useful life. It may have been at a madrigal dinner right here at Eliot Chapel when I personally met Larry for the first time. Lots and lots of people met him that way, because he usually played the part of the Queen's Lord High Chamberlain opposite Jim Shukart and his William Cecil. I think he thoroughly enjoyed playing that part, and I and many others I know thoroughly enjoyed watching him do that. Could it have been 20 years that he did that? As I look around, I recognize that this beloved sacred space has been pivotal in so many of our lives. Ann tells me that Larry was pretty much a loner, which I wonder at, because when I was with him, I never felt like I was a loner. I never felt alone with Larry. He always made me feel known. Somehow he could make you feel like you were somebody. Larry didn't join clubs that would have him, but he did enjoy being a member here at Eliot Chapel. He loved going to Bergfried, which is this congregation's acreage out near the Gasconade River, near Hermann, Missouri. And even though he pretty much disdained committees, he liked working on the church committee that oversaw that property. No, he didn't like committees generally, but he did start one of his own, calling it CAPS, C-A-P-S, Committee Against Participative Singing. From my experience in bands, he was a drummer after all. Who needs singing? Sorry. You could get the idea maybe that Larry didn't like church much. But Gretchen says one reason she became a congregational pastor was the time she spent sitting in the pew with Larry and then discussing with her dad what they'd experienced there. I know he liked church enough that he and Ann sometimes came over to Alton, Illinois, where I was serving the First Unitarian Church there. But then Linda and I moved to Venice, Florida, so I could serve that congregation down there. So goodbye, Larry and Ann, and so many of you and so many others. Then one beautiful Sunday morning, doing church down there in Venice, I look out from the pulpit. Way out in the back, there's somebody that looks a whole lot like Ann Kehler. Then not too far away, there's this guy that looks just like Larry Kehler. They had driven their Bluebird RV all the way to Florida. And I just know, or I just hope, that it was simply to come to church in Venice. Seriously, though, Larry was the sort of parishioner I and many ministers desperately need. One not prone to simply stop quickly in line after church and say to the preacher, "Nice sermon today, where are we going to eat?" Instead, he might say, "You know, when you said that, I thought about this, and then I wondered about that other thing." It wasn't just to complain that the preacher had done it all wrong, but to engage the questions that the sermon had asked and to put them in deeper historical or political or social context. Not to be a critic as in being simply and narrowly critical, but instead offering a larger critique, seeking a broader understanding of some topic or other, as well as a deeper connection with that preacher or pastor. You might agree with me or not that parishioners like that are few and far between, but I have treasured them when they've shown up. Larry certainly showed up in that way in my life. Speaking of participating in church, I remember asking Larry one time to come use his consultancy skills and facilitate a church retreat for the Alton congregation that year. He was amazing with that church, that group of church leaders, as he gently but firmly laid out the ground rules for the meeting and then started the discussion. And then, just as I expected, one of the flock became petulant. Wouldn't adhere to what we'd agreed that the process in the outline would be. Larry ever so gently stopped him and explained our group covenant nicely. And he stopped him again and did the same thing. And the third time he was somewhat more directive, as he could be. All of us in the room, I think, knew that he was serious at that point. We got an awful lot done that day. It wasn't just church. Larry was great at business. I remember Larry telling me about his time in Mexico City and the social and cultural differences he encountered there. It was fascinating to me to hear how not to do things, how not to talk to some of the help, how not to get his own coffee, how not to move that chair over to the meeting table for himself. In those offices and in that culture, they had clearly defined boundaries on who would do what tasks, and you didn't get out of your lane lest you embarrass yourself and others. It's funny to me how engrossed in Larry's stories I became, so engrossed that I remember all he told me about Mexico City, but nothing about what it was he did for a living there, because he didn't say anything about that. It seemed often that way. The story was about something, anything but Larry himself. He was great at bringing the focus back to the others he was with. My wife, Linda, tells of a time that she and Larry were paired off in a meeting in a small group exercise. The exercise called for one person to ask the other, and then they would trade out. One person would ask, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" Linda said that after she said, "I'm these people's children, and I'm this person's spouse, and I'm these people's mother," it can get a little difficult. Without Larry's steadfast presence and attention to her personally, she might have lost it. As it was, it became quite the learning experience for both. I suppose many people know something of Larry's struggles with medical issues, mobility for one, over the past, again, 15, 20 years and years. He would be down and then better, and down again and then not so good. Lord knows how many times. His suffering was, for me, unimaginable over all these many years. Things kept falling apart. And still he could surprise you by grabbing hold of some topic that excited him and rise up out of that pit and light up the room again with his interest and his knowledge and his joy, simple joy at being here on this planet. Sometimes it does get to be too much. For the one who cares, for the one who needs care, for the family members who are living their day-to-day lives while trying to keep up with their loved one, as changes occur that you didn't want to see, and the suffering increases, and time grows so obviously short. I understand that Larry got to visit with many of you these last few months. I think that's wonderful. I know I will cherish the times Linda and I were able to visit Larry and Ann and to reminisce about the old days and to remember how he'd repaired cars and RVs and discuss church and talk about family, especially family. Larry did love his family. Larry's family has requested I read this poem from Serendipity Corner. Sometimes when it's all quiet and you think you're all alone, a loved one may drop past to reassure you they've reached home. They may leave a little sign to let you know that they were there. A feather, a koan, a memorable song may linger in the air. They aren't too far away from us. Just a thought or prayer won't fail to connect our hearts again once more. They're no longer sick or frail. They want you to understand that they are healed and all is well. So accept the signs. Send your love. For they are just beyond the veil. I have some comments from Heidi and from Gretchen. Do I still have your permission to read? This is from Heidi. As I'm thinking of the things my dad gave me in his life, the thing I come back to is travel. Dad made me a curious and fearless traveler. His many stories of just picking up and going places were inspirational. He loved meeting people, was always interested in the minutiae of other people's lives. I remember a conversation with an Amish or Mennonite woman in Indiana near where he grew up. He asked her about the care of the white prayer cap she wore. And he was totally engaged with her description of the steps she took in washing it. No subject was too mundane to hold his interest. He imparted to me a great love of other places, particularly Mexico, probably starting with moving us all there when I was a child and then to all the different parts of the country that I've traveled to as an adult. Mexico was my favorite place, my favorite thing that we shared. As a postscript, as I was searching through a mountain of old pictures for making a memorial collage, I came across a picture of a pig piñata. After living in Mexico, I was dismayed that piñatas weren't available here for birthdays in this country. Once I saw the old picture, I remembered that pig. Dad had gotten a large balloon, covered it with paper mache and tissue paper, and completed the look with Dixie cups for snout and legs. There was my birthday piñata. My dad had a great talent for figuring out how to make things or fix things that couldn't be gotten in other ways. Or maybe they were available, but he could just do it much cheaper. As anyone who knows me now could tell you, this is also a gift I received from him. I know I'll be forever thinking, oh, I'll have to ask Dad, or I'll have to tell Dad about that. I will miss him. this from Gretchen. My dad was a wonderful storyteller, so it seems right for us to share stories today. I'm grateful that we're here at Eliot Chapel because my dad loved this place. My first story takes place at Eliot. It begins with a confession. When I was 8 years old, I hated Sunday school. I'm sure I owe apologies to all those RE teachers who had to deal with me. I believe that many parents would have forced their child to go to Sunday school, but not my dad. Instead, he said, "You can come to the service with me, but you have to sit quietly and you have to listen." I have so many memories of being with my dad in this chapel, sitting quietly and listening. On the ride home, he would talk about the sermon. Sometimes he agreed with the message. Sometimes he didn't, but he always thought about it. He always listened to what I thought, too, even though I was just a kid. My dad was a great listener, and I'll always be grateful for those Sundays. They are why I fell in love with church, too. My dad loved this church, and he also loved anything that could go fast. He was passionate about cars, boats, airplanes. If it had a motor, he wanted to get under the hood and figure out how it worked. I grew up with airplanes, boats, and cars in various states of being ripped apart and put back together again. He was at his happiest, his shirt sleeves rolled up, covered in grease, and fixing something. This summer, my husband and I went to visit him just a couple of weeks before he died. He was in a lot of pain. But he began reminiscing about his days growing up in Warsaw and all the cars that he'd tinkered with. His voice got steadier. He sat up straighter in his wheelchair. He smiled. His eyes lit up. He talked about rebuilding engines, bending metal, and in one particularly memorable incident, accidentally almost burned down his parents' garage with a blowtorch. He was so full of life telling these stories. I'm grateful that this will be one of my last memories of him. I will always appreciate his mechanical mindedness, his faith that broken things could always be fixed, and his flat-out joy for figuring things out. My last story is about a trip I took with my dad when I was 11. My dad was a fearless traveler and was always interested in exploring new places. He had a business trip to New York City, and he saw it as an opportunity for me to see the city. He had to work one day, and then he planned to take me to all the sites. So I was so excited. There was only one little hitch. Since he had a meeting that first day, he decided to drop me off at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He gave me a handful of cash and waved as I ran up the steps into the museum, telling me to meet him back out here on the steps at 5. My delight and excitement lasted all the way up the steps until I realized that he hadn't given me enough money to cover admission. But he was gone. In a time before cell phones, I had no way to contact him. I did get into the museum by blending in with the school group. I spent the day on the edge of different groups, hoping no one noticed that I didn't belong. When it came time to meet my dad on the steps, he was there with a big smile on his face. That smile disappeared when I told him what had happened. He apologized, and then he said, "What an adventure you've had. I bet you will never forget it." Then he said I could pick any restaurant in New York City for dinner. That night, we strolled down Fifth Avenue past the most beautiful buildings I'd ever seen, including this restaurant with big, ornately carved wooden doors and a man outside wearing a turban. was Indian food. I'd never had Indian food. I wanted to go there. My dad didn't even try to talk me out of it. Inside, there were spicy smells, white tablecloths, silver dishes, peacock feathers on the wall, and the best food I'd ever had in my life. It was magical. My dad taught me that it's okay to make mistakes and to apologize. He taught me that life can be a fun adventure if you look at it the right way. And he taught me that even when things don't go as planned, they can be magical. And my dad was right. I will never forget that day. I'm proud to be Larry's daughter. I'm grateful for all that he was and all that he shared with me. He was loved by many, and he will be missed. I believe Julia and Anne both have things to say.
Get it together. I just want to thank everybody for being here to honor our dad. All of those that are online watching, thank you. It means so much to everybody. Okay. This is called Larry, Stepdad, Other Dad, Dad. And it's going to take me a few. I have to breathe in between each of my paragraphs. Fatherhood requires love, not DNA. For those of you that know me, you know that I have two dads. My bio dad, who I love very much, and who lives elsewhere, has lived elsewhere most of my adult life, and with whom I've had to work very hard to have a relationship with because of our differing ideals, and that's okay. Then there's my other dad, who started out as Larry, and then stepdad, and then other dad, and then just dad. Our first encounter was when I was 14, and he came to pick my mother up for their first date. And a bunch of my friends and I were hiding behind the cars in the parking lot going, ooh, you know, as kids do. And he smiled, and he took it in stride. I knew that was a first good sign. He wasn't upset. As time went on, and as some of you in this room know, I was a very troubled teen. I don't have a lot of memories of that time that were good. What I do remember is that Larry was always there in the background with kind words of encouragement, as were many of the people here in this room. It's time to breathe. My mom and Larry met when I was 17. My mom and Larry married when I was 17 and living on my own in Kansas City. My brother and I came to St. Louis for the wedding. When I came home at 19, Larry endured being severely outnumbered by 3 teen women a year apart and my mom in the same house. Let's just say he was a saint. I brought a lot of chaos to that situation, and it wasn't until I was 19 and my rebirth at St. Joseph's Hospital. If you know, you know. And some of you know. In Kirkwood. That I started to get my act together somewhat. He was all in for that transformation that our family would undergo together. From 19 to 27, I worked on myself, making many mistakes along the way. My stepdad was always there, caring, never judgmental, stern, but not mean, giving me advice that I sometimes ignored and sometimes took. I took it to heart. When I had my son Zach in 1994, my other dad was there in the room, wiping my forehead with a cool cloth, comforting me and cheering me on. And lo and behold, sitting in the chair next to me when they handed him my son. Yes, he got to hold Zach before I did. And a bond was forever formed. This began the lifelong argument, whose Zach is he? When other grandchildren started to show up, Zach appeared and grabbed my mom around the leg and said, "My Nana," laying claim to her to make sure she remembered. She would reply, "My Zach." Anytime Zach saw Grandpa, he would just fall into a hug with him. And Grandpa had to get in on the action, claiming we were all crazy. That was his Zach. He would take Zach on fishing trips and hikes in the woods and help him with his Pinewood Derby car for Cub Scouts. He was always there for him, cheering him on. I am forever grateful that Zach got to see Grandpa in March. He came in and threw himself on Larry in his wheelchair, just as he'd always done, and gave him the biggest hug. And Larry was just grinning from ear to ear. Larry was so proud of the man that Zach had become, the business he started, and the life he built in Colorado. He was the best grandpa to all the grandkids. Always interested in what they were accomplishing, and would light up to see them and spend time. So proud of each of them. As some of you in this room may be aware, I was the girl that was never getting married. I refused to settle for less than the love that my parents had. I had a shining example of what it should look like. I went through some bad relationships, and for the last 15 years of my single life, pretty much lived alone with my son. And I recently recalled one time where my dad came to me after leaving a bad relationship, and he begged me, and he said, "Please don't call him. You'll ask him to stay." He was always looking out for what was best for me. He knew that something or someone was out there for me that was much better than I settled for. In 2012, I met my husband. He was kind and family-oriented and loved to spend time with my family as well as his own. This was the missing thing that plagued my ability to want to get married or want to be in a relationship. As someone who loved my family as much as their own, watching Kirk with my dad for the last 13 years has been a delight. They have so much in common: intelligent researchers and computers and gadgets and good food and cars and sports and so much more. I feel like Kirk was like a son to Larry and a dad that filled a void for Kirk that he had been missing for so long. When Kirk and I got married in 2017, we rode our motorcycles to North Carolina. Mom and Larry carrying all the things in their big motorhome. My dress, Kirk's clothing, a cake, and we got our flowers. And then we found the most beautiful spot in North Carolina to get married by a river with motorcycles going by. So appropriate. But Larry was there to walk me over to my future, the one that he told me to hold out for. And he told the story of the long road that it took to get there. His stories were always the best. It was a very special moment for me. I realized after many years of watching my parents together that I married somebody just like my dad. I have him to thank for showing me how a man should treat a woman and how kindness can shape a life. He lived an extraordinary 87 years of life. Sorry. As people have already talked about, he was a carny, he was an inventor, a farm kid. In the Air Force, he played drums. A sailor, loved planes, race cars, lived in another country, spoke another language, had two great loves in his life, was a family man, a father, a grandpa, traveled the world, loved to collect things and tinker, educated, and made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. He was always quietly, non-judgmentally, kindly there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. There is no greater gift that a man who loves another man's child as his own can give. And he gave me that. And there's no greater gift for me than being able to call him my dad. I miss him so much, but his voice is in my head and my heart, saying I love you too, with that sweet smile. I know this is going to make us all cry, including me, but I want you to smile at what a wonderful, wonderful life he had, and how amazing it is that I had him for 44 years. Rest easy, Dad. I love you. Your other daughter.
I only have 10 pages, if you're okay with that, right? I want you to know what just happened, unplanned. On my watch, it says, my Nana, from my grandson in Colorado. He's watching. So I think I need to tell you that there are several of us that have these tan, like kerchiefs, but we're using them as hankies, and that's because Larry famously had nothing but tan khaki pants in his wardrobe, and to try and get him to wear anything else was impossible. So here it is. So first, thank you to my girls, Heidi, Julia, and Gretchen, for their help in putting this service together. And to the chorus, to my chorus, who are the best support system one can have. Also to my dear friends, Cleaver and Linda Van Sant, for making the trip from Florida to California to Vegas to St. Louis, then back to Vegas to pick up their car to continue to Colorado, great, because it says who knows where on my paper. Oh, and throw in this. Cleaver officiated his daughter's wedding in the middle of this trip. Larry would love the triptych as much as I do. Thank you, thank you. Words of Great Wisdom by Whitney Hansen. You've just come in from the rain. You can't expect to be immediately warm and comfortable, but you can do little things. Take off the heavy clothing, turn on the coffee pot, wrap yourself in a blanket, one small thing at a time. I've thought a lot about this day, the celebration of the life and times of my husband of 40 years. We were working very hard at living, not worrying about dying and death, although We had reason to do so. Our lives together, it was eclectic, to say the least. You heard we have this huge family. So great, get ready to know something about Larry Kehler, some stories I've heard from him and others we created together. Larry was an only child, born to Dale and Ruth Kehler the last day of August, 1937 in Warsaw, Indiana. He completed grade school and high school and then went into the Air Force. While Larry was in high school, he and his drumming buddies won every accolade they could win at every contest. Playing the drums was a big deal to Larry. He never stopped playing the drums. He played in the high school band. He played in the Air Force band. He played in a pickup band while in the Air Force. He played in the O'Fallon, Missouri Community Band. He played on the steering wheel, the tabletop, the arm of his wheelchair in his head. He heard that beat. Larry was raised in the Brethren Church, a conservative Protestant church. Their principles promote peace and reconciliation, simple living, integrity of speech, family values, and service to neighbors near and far, following the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Larry believed Christ followed a teaching life, and he believed in the principles of the Unitarian Church, very similar to the Brethren principles and values. So I'm going to tell you some stories about Larry's life and some of his adventures. You've kind of heard an overview, but I got a few details. You see, he was all about exploring things. He could build, fix, dream about, and put that dream into reality. Some of these stories will make you laugh, and some will make you smile. Larry worked on car rebuilds a lot in his life. A lot. The car he had in high school, he worked on in the family garage that was attached to the house. According to him, that car was a thing of beauty. But back to drumming. Drummers must practice, and some drummers take their drums home from school, not the usual practice pad. Larry took his drum set home in the back of his car, a car that had work to be done on it. The car was parked in the garage of his parents' modest home in Warsaw, Indiana, where the work could be done out of the weather. Larry's friend had come over, and these two high school buddies were talking when they suddenly saw fire in the back of the car. The drum set was still in the car, and worse, the garage was attached to the house. So Larry jumped in the car, flames licking at his neck, backed the car out into the street, jumped out, and watched everything burn. The garage house was safe, but a new drum set had to be purchased for the school. After high school, Larry joined the Air Force and was first assigned to language school in Madrid. He was so excited to think he'd get to go to Spain. Yes, fantastic. But wait, the sergeant said. You're a drummer? It really wasn't a question. He next said, you're now assigned to the Air Force band. And so it was to be. Larry was crushed. That gig lasted for 4 years, 4 very long years in the military band, flying to honor ceremonies in the comfort of troop planes. Larry used his military benefits to go to school after getting out of the Air Force. He went to IU. No, not Illinois University, where our son-in-law, daughter, and grandson all graduated. Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, he would tell me with conviction. Larry graduated with an undergrad in psychology and a master's in management consulting. He also met the love of his life, Karen. As soon as she graduated nursing school, they were married. They had 2 daughters, Heidi and Gretchen. When in college, Larry was part of the Hands Off Cuba movement. He lived in an off-campus house with others of like mind. Everything was great until his parents came to visit, and saw the huge banner that hung in the house. Larry said his conservative mother was not very happy. I guess the issue resolved itself, though, as she lived to be 100 years old. One year, Larry took a vacation to see his parents, who were now living in Bradenton, Florida. While there, he had another creative moment. Did you know that you can build a diving helmet and terrify your parents when using it? Of course, Larry did that. He built the helmet, and in his mind, he needed to test it. So he asked his parents to participate in this folly by driving him over to the Gulf of Mexico. They sat in the car and watched as Larry put on the suit, helmet, and tank of air and walked out into the waters of the Gulf to disappear. Larry was having the time of his life. It worked. He could see and he could breathe. Everything was just as he planned, except for one thing. His parents watched as a big storm arrived over them, and their only child, their son, their shining star, was under the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Needless to say, Larry survived the dive with only a few noxious fumes affecting his return to tell the story. Right after graduation, Larry got a consulting job in Indianapolis, but soon moved on to Touche Ross, now Deloitte, here in St. Louis. He worked hard and eventually became senior partner in the firm. Shortly after moving here, he was offered a position in Mexico City, which you heard Cleaver talking about. But first they said, we're sending you to the Berlitz Language School here in Clayton, as you'll be working in Spanish when you get to Mexico City. Well, Larry barely passed the requisite language class in college, German. But being Larry, he went to the classes. It was very frustrating. They will not speak anything but the language they're teaching. That includes going to lunch every day where the menu was in Spanish and the wait staff only spoke to him in Spanish. Larry said he learned nothing from that course and everything he did know from living in Mexico City. He loved Mexico. We traveled a lot in Mexico. Larry also used his Air Force benefits to become a pilot. In fact, he became a commercial pilot. So comforting when we were traveling. I mean, you know, there was a problem in the cockpit. He could go up there and fly the plane. Not. One time going through Pittsburgh, or was it Philadelphia, and he said to me while sitting in a snowstorm ready for takeoff, hope they get all the ice off the wings before we take off. And I asked, why? His answer, if they don't get the ice off the wings, the plane won't lift. And the end of this runway is on the top of a mountain with a 1,000-foot drop-off at the end. I didn't need to hear that. Because he was a pilot, he became interested in home-built planes, the kind you could build at home, in your basement. Go ahead, ask the question. I know you're thinking it. Several years and expensive orders of supplies later, the plane parts were moved out the basement door to storage, never to be completed. Actually, it's illegal to fly that plane now anyway, so it was probably a good thing. About a year ago, Larry no longer wanted to go out anymore. It was difficult to get out the door in his electric chair, up the ramp into the van, and then hooked up with safety belts. So in that time, he found out he could order groceries from Aldi's. He loved doing those orders. For one thing, he could order things I wouldn't buy, like sweet rolls and cookies. And always with those orders came flowers. I asked him why the flowers, and he said, because you deserve them. I loved those bouquets. Madrigal. It was a magical time in our lives. I sang in the Madrigal Singers. Larry played the Lord High Chamberlain at the dinners. Dear friends, Evie and Jim Schuchart came from that adventure, Jim being unruly king, and Larry at the king's bidding for 20 years. Such a fun duo. Larry always supported my musical life. In the last 30-plus years, he was part of my Sweet Adeline life. After one regional contest, my friends and I walked into the house to find Larry had baked us chocolate chip cookies. Later in life, he agreed to go to respite when it was contest week, allowing me to have that time worry-free. He watched our webcast, cheering us on from home. One time he was in the hospital and showed it to the nurses, who were very excited to talk to me when I returned home. Larry always came to our friends and family nights. I've gained the best friends through this organization. Did you know? Larry traveled for about a year with a carnival. He loved the bear pitch game, you know, the one where you throw the pennies and you win a big bear. Just another random Larry fact. And one last Larry fact. He hitchhiked from Indiana to the Grand Canyon and back in 4 days. He got a ride on the way back in an 18-wheeler. The driver at the first stop said he was too tired to keep going, but he told Larry, "You could go ahead and drive." Larry had no idea how to drive that truck with all its gears, but he figured if he wanted to get home, he'd have to learn on the job. He said he drove in some low gear for a while until he figured out the rest of the gear system. It's who he was. And yes, he got a CDL license, but he never used it. As most of you here today know, Larry and I had a really good and exciting life together. We did a lot of RV travel in the last 20 years before his illness became worse. We had a motorhome and we went coast to coast, down to the tip of Florida and back, and spent many hours enjoying that lifestyle. Yes, that's true. Some of our Wander Lodge coach friends are here today by live stream to celebrate. And my sister Mary in Wyoming, my brother Dan in Florida, my brother Bill in Illinois, as well as my son Stephen in Wisconsin, all live streaming. Our very special friends in Michigan, we feel your love. Also Larry's cousins, Phyllis, Carolyn, and Cecilia, who were instrumental in Larry becoming the man he was and how he lived his life, all able to be with you. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you one more "Isn't it odd, it's God" story. It's about the box sitting before you that represents Larry so well. When looking for the appropriate vessel for Larry's ashes, a beautiful box was found online. It had a sailboat on the front. Sailing was something Larry loved, but the cost for the box was way too much money. So beautiful, but we knew Larry would not approve of spending the money. One of my daughters, Joya, was talking to a friend about the issue and what she had found that was so perfect for the person. It turned out that this friend just happened to have one more box he had because he did burning designs. That is what you see here today, that beautiful box, designed like the very expensive one, donated to honor Larry. Thank you, Dusty and Mary. In 1985, 40 years ago, this last June 29, Larry and I were married. Some of you here today were with us on that day, outside in the Sappington House garden. It was a beautiful, warm, but not hot day. John Robinson, minister emeritus of this church, officiated. All parents were alive and attended, and the madrigal singers provided music. One funny thing that happened at our reception was everyone knew where we were going on our honeymoon, except me. Larry had purposely not told me exactly where we were going. All our friends and the family had a great time making jokes like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I did not find out exactly where until we got to Miami and made a stop at the airport for a transfer. Larry positioned me across the room from the desk. I think he thought I couldn't see over there. We went to St. Thomas, where Larry had chartered a sailboat and had it provisioned for our honeymoon. Larry sailed in college, and we had sailed a lot on Lake Carlisle. St. Thomas was our first time doing ocean sailing. It was glorious, after fixing a few problems with the boat. But those are stories for another day. On our 15th anniversary, we celebrated with a week in Jamaica. And on our 30th anniversary, Larry proposed on bended knee with my beautiful diamond ring in a black velvet box that he had hidden in the motorhome for over a month. We told everyone we were engaged. Life without Larry is not as eclectic or interesting. The last 4 years became more and more difficult for both of us as we aged in place. But we were together, doing what we needed to do to continue our lives in the best way possible. At the end of Larry's life, talking had become difficult. Thinking out sentences took effort. He was tired. He just didn't talk a lot. I'd say, "I love you," and he'd just kind of smile and nod his head. So I taught him to say, "I love you" in sign language. The last night he put on his skull cap, pulled the covers up around his face, looked at me and gave me the sign, not raising his arm, but fingers barely visible over the edge of his covers. I signed back, smiled, and knew in my heart our time was almost over. He died the next morning at home in his bed, as he wished, and I was there with him. On Larry's 70th birthday, 17 years ago, we held his party down at Barnes Rehab. Julia's present was a book created of comments about Larry from his friends. The book is here today. My writing was the last entry, and it says, "Here's to us, to what we've done, stayed together, supported each other, been happy, made something of ourselves, grew up, changed, defied the odds. I'm proud of that, proud of us, in love with you, still, always, love you, Anne. Siempre te amo." He's in God's hands now.
It's a reading from the theologians Rita Nakashima Brock and Rebecca Ann Parker. Those who cannot grieve fail to recognize when life is at risk. Mourning strengthens our ability to choose life and to protect it, even as the pain of grief threatens to destroy us. Those who mourn experience the mystery of a presence that is not wholly lost, that accompanies the living with a tenderness and power that alters their lives. The world changes. The surface mask thins. Life becomes luminous with fire. The heart expands its breadth. Love is as strong as death. I invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation. We give thanks today for the life of Larry Kehler. To us, he was husband, father, stepfather, grandfather, our family, our friend. Death has taken him, but it is his life that so moves us, and it is his love that we carry on and share. We who grieve are proof of his life and his love, and he has not gone from us completely as long as we have our memories, as long as we can share with others what he meant to us. May we be generous enough to continue telling the story. May we have courage enough to live with our loss. May we have love enough to reach out and comfort one another, even as we grieve. This is a benediction in the words of the Reverend Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, and to bow to the mystery. Shalom, salam, amen, and blessed be. This room, you're invited to come to the to Adams Hall, which no one knows where that is, except if you'll just follow us, we'll go there. If you're on Zoom,